Anyone got a chance to look through the material on Canvas before class?
No, miss.
I saw week 1. I didn't see week 2 yet.
Miss, are you talking about non-verbal communication and the examples like kinesis and haptic and sense of touch and thing? Yeah, I started to read
Yes, I did
about
that.
it.
Right.
Yeah, I
Take
just
note.
Yeah.
Yes, miss.
Okay. So today, let's really the conversation should be student led. You had readings, examples to read of different writing styles, and what I would like to hear from you then are your thoughts on your readings. So starting with, did you all get to read the samples of narrative, writing, descriptive? You got a chance to read vocal delivery. You talked about the kinesics, haptics, vocalics, chronemics. You all got to read those?
Yes, ma'am.
What about active listening? Okay. So, let's start with that. Right. So this week, we are supposed to be looking at both oral and written communication. Written communication in the form of the different writing genres and uses of writing, and nonverbal communication in terms of kinesics, haptics, vocalics, proxemics, chronemics, as well as listening techniques, right? What I do realize is that it was a bit scattered. My apologies, that was an editing mistake, but all the information is here, right? So if we're looking at, in terms of genres, we have recount, narrative, explanation, types of writing you'd find in the workplace, writing you would have in your personal life, and writing if you are a member of an organization like an NGO or on the board of some kind, right? All right. Now, if you see something like this, it might not show in Canvas, but if you click the link, you'll get to the link. So a recount is basically retelling of an event that happened. A personal recount is an event that happened to you, in your own life. You have different kinds of recounts. You have personal, factual, which is more like newspaper reports, etc., right? So if you've ever watched any kind of movie about children attending school and they come back the new semester, they always ask, what did you do over the summer? And you're supposed to write an essay. That's a personal recount. So that is you retelling what you did in a chronological fashion. Right? So you would see some further examples. We talked about personal, factual, like a newspaper. So when they report, when you report on an event that happened as a journalist, it's a factual recount. And usually, again, you're just trying to tell people what happened. It's not necessarily adding any analysis or deeper thought. As much as possible, you're trying to say, this is what happened and this is how it happened. An imaginative recount, it's where you make up an illustration. So if you're trying to explain something, you imagine a scenario. It's based on fact. It's not filled with unicorns and dragons and knights and stuff like that. It's based on something that can actually happen, right? But it's imaginative in that I'm giving an illustration of what could possibly typically happen in real life. And again, you would go through in a chronological fashion, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Procedural recount in terms of if you're doing an investigation or a scientific experiment. So when you see, if you come across articles or reports on a scientific experiment, they will tell you step 1, we did this, step 2, we did that, step 3, we did this. And it's literally, again, just telling you what happened in a chronological fashion, right? You can think of a recipe. Like if you ever watch cooking shows, and they tell you the recipe, okay, then you do this, then we did this, then we did that, and this is how we get this, right? So it's recounting the procedure you went through. While a literary recount, it's for entertainment. So it will be factual, but it will be written in a style that is entertaining to read, nice to read, right? So a lot of the times when you see, if you read an autobiography or a memoir, right, it's recounting your life, but in a way that is engaging, entertaining to read. We won't necessarily dwell on the examples of recounts. Right? So I just want to go through the explanations of the various forms, and then you can read the samples on your own.
What is the difference between Goldilocks and the Three Bears and a newspaper article on bear attack statistics? Both are about human interaction with bears, but the difference is the first is a made-up story about girl meeting some bears, while the second is reporting on facts about bears. A story has many obvious differences from a statistical report. Goldilocks is an example of narrative writing, which is any kind of writing that tells a story. Usually, narrative writing is categorized as fiction, which is based on imaginative events or stories that did not actually happen. The other category of writing is known as nonfiction, which would be writing that is based on real facts. This usually consists of newspapers, essays, reports, and other informative writing. However, some nonfiction can in fact tell a story, which would classify it as narrative writing. In the case of nonfiction, the story must be a true story with real people and events. Autobiographies and biographies are examples of nonfiction that is narrative writing, as they tell the real story of a person's life. There are many specific traits every piece of narrative writing should have. All stories must have characters, also known as the people or subjects of the story. Usually, there are also specific types of characters needed in order to create a developed story. For example, each story will often have a protagonist, which is the hero or heroine. This is a central character of the story. Often there is also an antagonist, which is a character who opposes the protagonist. Overall, each story needs characters to push forward or react to the events in the plot. In addition to characters, every story must have a plot or events that occur. Think of your favorite book. What if none of the events in that book happened? Take away the plot and the characters would just be sitting around doing nothing. Would it still be your favorite book? Of course not. It would be the most boring read ever. Every story needs a plot.
Oh, fine. It will go on to tell you every story needs a plot, and the plot has a beginning, middle, and end. And this allows you to not just tell the factual as it happens, but you're starting to arrange it in a way that you can tell a story. So all these things happen. This is what led to what we call the crisis or the turning or the change, which leads to a rise in action, to a climax, where the situation is resolved. Usually in traditional storytelling, the situation is resolved, or is the problem is met head on in the climax. And then the falling action is how this leads to a resolution or a clearing up of the problem, right? In modern narration, sometimes there is no solution found, but you will have a beginning where we get introduced to all the characters, we get introduced to the issues that they're facing, the major problem that spurs the action in the rising action to the climax, where you confront the problem head on, and then the falling action where you're working towards hopefully a resolution. This, as you all are training to teach, this is a handy guide of how do you teach narrative in a school setting. And you can read through it more in, in depth on your own time, but suffice it to say, for those of us who are biased towards reading narratives, fiction, nonfiction, doesn't matter. The ability to read a story, analyze a story, translates into our ability to understand the world at large, to make sense of it in a more meaningful way. And so we always encourage teachers to teach narrative, teach both fiction and nonfiction. Start that appreciation of reading, because it sets you up to live a more fulfilling life in ways that you might not even connect with just sitting down and reading a book. Right? So again, this for things to look at when you are actually reading narrative, like the organization, how do you craft a narrative, how you begin it, how you start it. You know, they always tell you to start with something that will hook your reader, for example. So in your own writing, if you're doing a narrative, and in this class, it would be a nonfiction narrative, you still want to be able to hook the reader with something that would draw them into your essay, right? If you're writing using narrative genre, even with the other types of, well, with expository writing, it allows you to be a little more creative, even as you're being factual and informative. So this is an example of, it crosses genres. It's both a recount and a narrative. Right. Now, most writing is meant to give some kind of information or explanation, right?
Good morning.
Morning. So explanation and instruction gets pretty close to what expository writing is all about. It's you're explaining something, usually a process. So when we look at process analysis is where that's all we do. We explain a process step by step, right? Right? So again, you can look through this on your own, but suffice it to say, an explanation is the majority of our explication type of essays. I'm explaining something, right? It could be why something caused something, or what the effects of something is. So that's cause and effect. I might be explaining how two things either match up or do not match up. So compare and contrast. I might be explaining an abstract term. So that's an extended definition. You might explain, what's the other thing? Oh gosh, drawing a blank. And like I said, how a process works. So that's half explanation, half instruction, right? Process analysis will involve some form of instruction, but also explaining each step of your instruction. So it blends the two. So you will see overlap. So for example, this is an actual news report about reparations. So on the one hand, it's a factual recount, but it's also giving you explanations of certain things, terms, and so on. So you will see, usually in writing, we are blending genres, or we're using aspects of different genres to achieve a specific purpose. Right? And since this is actually a speech, we could listen to. We could listen to some of it.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
Of the 4th of July. Fellow citizens, pardon me, and allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, an unholy license. Your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes that would disgrace a nation of savages. There's not a nation of the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour forth a stream, a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And the crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
That was James Earl Jones reading the word.
So again, you can see he was explaining something. This is another example of explanation / instruction. So you can again read that on your own time. And I will, when we talk about nonverbal communication, keep that video that you just watched in mind, okay? Auto sequence. So, like I said, it's somewhat slightly out of sequence. But in terms of writing in your personal life, perhaps a dead art form now is writing personal letters. And again, I will let you read through this on your own time. What is an example of writing in your personal life, writing letters, writing editors to journals, letters to the editor, sorry, either newspaper or journals or what have you. How does you guys? In terms of writing in the workplace, writing memos, which have a specific structure. It is usually to the point. It is supposed to be shorter than a letter or an email, and is designed to hit something very, very specific. Business letters, again, you still correspond with business letters, emailed in or actual paper. You receive tons of it in the mail every day. You know, if you apply for a loan, you will eventually get a letter from the bank, for example. You will get a letter from your insurance company telling you to renew. So letter writing is still very much a part of the corporate life, right? And again, when you get the chance to scroll through Canvas, you will see examples. You can read through the examples, right? Resumes are also vital in business writing. That's how you get hired. And there are specific formats for writing a good resume, as well as what we call a CV or curriculum vitae, which is slightly different. The resume is usually short, bullet point, quick explanation of and recap of your work history. A CV allows you to be a little more expansive and to capture in more detail what your work history would have been like. Usually you see CVs for higher positions, professional positions. Entry level, you will get a lot of, you'll be working on resumes. You want to get to the point as quickly as possible to get that job, right? So we have sample resumes, for example. So again, what you see being highlighted are what you would have done. So the resume usually starts with your job experience, right? Then you would say what education you've had. Usually you start with the highest degree, and if you have, this person opted only for the bachelor's because secondary school at that point was trumped by having a bachelor's. So the higher your degree, the less you go back in history with your education. I know for some applications in Trinidad, it doesn't matter what degree you have, they want to know what school you went to in secondary school. I don't know why. When I applied, they still ask me for my CXC records. I'm like, you realize I have a PhD, right? What I did in high school does not matter anymore. But they wanted to see it anyway. So depending on the company, you do your research, depending on the company, you might include all, as much of your education. But for a standard resume, you stop with the top or the highest 3 degrees that you've earned, right? So you might go PhD, master's, bachelor's, and stop there. And if they want to know more, that will be in the application, right? You like to stress all the skills that would be useful for the job you're applying for, right? So it's another example. Right, this one is arranged a little differently. And because this is a service job, so it starts with qualifications, then relevant skills, work history, then education. So again, the format sometimes depends on the job you are applying for, but these are the basic things you want to include on a resume. And you notice it's bullet point, action language. So you don't, this is not a space for passive voice at all. You're encouraged to write it in, I did this, I did that, I did yeah. This is the one time you get to boast a lot in your resume or your CV. Right, now again, this is a discussion for you to partake in. You can do it outside of class. It requires you reading all the samples, right? And yes, I need to do some rearranging. I'll have it properly hung together by the end of the day. I don't know why. I thought it was arranged properly, but this is what happens when you copy and paste and drag and all of that, right? So the next thing we are supposed to look at is nonverbal communication. And in this case, I mean, the last time we talked about varieties of English, and we talked about accents, inflection, and so on. This is a closer look at how nonverbal, as well as in general, what we might call non-linguistic. So not the words you speak per se, what I like to call paralinguistics, or how you use your voice. Not the words, but how you use your voice, right? So that's vocalics. So if I can find it. Right. The first one is a definition of kinesics. And basically that is all body motions, actual body language, and how it affects our communication, right? This is the Webster Dictionary version or explanation of what kinesics is. It's a fancy word for body language. So, you know, when you're talking to someone and you see them cross their arms or their legs and they lean away from you, that's actually a message they're sending without having to use words. And they're closed off to your communication. And they're physically barring your communication by crossing their arms. You might see them look away from you, look down, and they're actually physically disengaging from what you have to say. They're not making eye contact. And it's a sign, an actual physical sign that the communication process might be breaking down. Right? Let me start over. Come on. Right. Right, so there's an example here using Steve Jobs and looking at some of his body language and how that informs the communication, right? So one of the things they notice, for example, is that often when he's talking, he might subconsciously make the okay gesture, which, by the way, if you ever travel to Brazil, don't do this. It means something completely different in Brazil. You would get chased. That's all I'm going to see, right? But in a lot of Western culture influenced by American culture, this is a sign for okay. And it literally means, okay, listen to me, I'm saying something that you need to pay attention to. This ability to put your hand behind your head, lean back. And you might have seen this gesture if you're in a conversation with somebody and you say something they think is silly or irrelevant, and they actually lean back. They might actually go back like that, or they will lean back in some way and fix you with a gaze that is supposed to indicate that you really don't know, and I am actually on top in this conversation. And it suggests confidence and superiority. Where you might have a gesture similar to this, which indicates you're thinking. People have, and knowing people, they have different signs. So it's not hard and fast that everybody, when they're thinking, would do this. That might not be your gesture, but you will actually have a gesture that indicates that you're thinking, you're contemplating. Some people scratch their head, some people look up in the sky as if they're searching for an answer, and so on and so on. So the idea of kinesics is looking at how the body language conveys extra information, right? So they tell you, for example, when people are lying, they look up to, I think it's they look up to the left. I can't remember which direction now, but they look up to the left or to the right because they're actually accessing the creative portion of their brain. And so it's usually an indication, not hard and fast, but it's usually an indication that they're making up something to tell you, right? So you can go through again, you can look at the gestures and you can consider the gestures you use to indicate extra meaning, right? This is an interesting example to pause on, because typically when you cross your arms and you turn your head away, right, it means you're disengaging. What I've noticed with people who wear glasses or who have some kind of distracted by sight, they would turn away from you and turn their ear to you, which indicates that they're listening intently, right? Here, they say this indicates he's being sincere and it's a level of innocence. So it depends partially on the individual. It depends on the culture the individual comes from, and other cues, right? To read the body language. So this is an example of how you can read his body language. He's been studied, and these are the things that it comes to mean in his form of nonverbal communication. I don't want you to take this as hard and fast. Everybody does this in nonverbal communication, right? Add the person's culture, age, gender, profession, all the things we talked about as in terms of communication barriers, keep that in mind with nonverbal communication as well. Okay. It's a lot of thunder, right? In terms of haptics, and this is something we might be very, very familiar with because Trinidadians are touchy-feely people. Well, now with COVID, we can't be touchy-feely people, but we used to be touchy-feely people. They always want a hug, you put in a hand on you, right? And this is actually a form of communication as well, right? Using touch to communicate meaning. Right? So again, we could look at different types of touch. I won't, let's just to show you the definition. So using touch to communicate, withholding touch is also a form of communication, right? So as children, you know, I don't know if you ever heard of like a handsy baby, for example. You know, you can't put the baby down. As soon as you put the baby down, it cries. And their instinct is the more touch, because they cannot communicate verbally. That touch becomes a form of communication that shows your attachment to the child. And slowly, as we gain the ability to communicate verbally, or I would say linguistically, because that would then include sign language, you find that the need for that reassuring touch starts to diminish. The child becomes more independent, right? Some of us grow up to be touchy-feely no matter what, and you know, we have to touch your shoulder when we're saying hi, and all these different things, right? So the idea of expressing friendship or camaraderie through touch. So, you know, yes, you pat somebody on the back, you might stroke their arm. Of course, it all depends on how well you know the person. And in this day and age, if you know the person is COVID-free, right? So we've developed different ways, in formal and informal settings, high fives, bounce, hugs, pats, right? And the handshake. There are studies written on the handshake and what handshakes mean and what they convey, right? Now, it's important in understanding, again, looking at the cultural, the communication barriers in settings, how and when to use touching as a form of communication, because it can be misconstrued, which can get you into a lot of trouble. There are people who do not like to be touched no matter what the setting. There are people who interpret touch as disrespect, no matter what type of touch it is. So be very careful in communicating. And of course, if you're giving a speech, touch is not as important, but in one-on-one conversations, face-to-face encounters, knowing when and how to use touch can help. Both if you are touching someone or someone is touching you, right? Understanding what they might be trying to convey. So, it goes through different types and different situations of personal communication and where touch would be important. So kinesics is body language, you posture you take, the hand signs you use. Haptics is touch, how you use touch to communicate. Right. If you could see here. So vocalics. Oh, it's still very tiny. Is how we use our voice, not the words, but other other things such as tone of voice. So this is usually, you know, if someone is speaking to you and they sound angry or happy or sad, it's not the words they're using, it's the tone of the voice. And that usually depicts your emotional status, your attitude to the situation or the subject. So if your tone is dismissive, for example, you do not have that, you do not have respect for the subject matter you're talking about, right? Tone then translates into writing as well, and we do talk about tone in writing, and that is the attitude of the writer to the subject matter that they're writing about. So it's kind of the same thing, right? So, oh, I have arrows, right? No, right? So paying attention to your tone. I'm pretty sure everyone has had the experience of getting in trouble, even though you're saying pleasant words, your tone isn't right, and you get called on it, right? So paying attention. So that's one form of vocalics, is the tone you use. You have pitch, right? And as it says, pitch is the rise or fall of your voice. So when we were talking about regional accents, for example, and if you've ever heard what they call Valley Girl speech, everything is a question. In English, when we're asking questions, we raise the pitch at the end of the sentence, so it goes up, as opposed to come in a statement it stays flat. In a question, it goes up, and usually that's how we indicate in verbal communication when we're asking a question or making a statement, right? So you can play around with pitch when you're speaking, and playing around with pitch makes the speech more interesting, helps you add emphasis where you want to add emphasis, and so on. So playing with how you raise and drop the tone of your voice, right? Frequency, you have relatively little control over. Frequency is the in terms of sound, when we say a high pitch or low pitch. So you have some people, like when we watch the video, that James Earl Jones' voice has a lower pitch. It's sonorous, it's low, it's from the chest, right? As opposed to someone with a higher pitched voice like Mickey Mouse, where the voice is very high, right? And you can play around a bit with your pitch. You can, and dropping it and raising it, that kind of stuff. Usually the lower the pitch, the more we pay attention, and that's a cultural thing. And it varies between genders as well. Too low a pitch in a woman's voice can actually be off-putting to some listeners. So understanding how pitch plays in non-verbal or verbal communication, right? I talked about that variety, raising and dropping your voice. Rate of speech, how quickly we speak. Some people speak so fast that you don't understand them. And that could be a problem. So if you're giving a speech and you're racing down, be aware that people might not be hearing everything you say, and they might not understand because it went by too fast. Synchrony is when you adjust your pitch and your voice, you adjust all your verbal and non-verbal cues to match the person you're talking to, right? So you tend to notice, if you are a very intuitive communicator and the person starts to cross their arms and legs, you start to cross your arms and legs too. If the person is speaking in a kind of flat voice, you start to mimic that. This shows that you're in sync with the person you're communicating with. And if you don't do that, it shows just how much you are not in sync with the person you're communicating with, right? Is also, you will speed up or slow down depending on the person you're communicating with, right? And as well as your emotions. Yeah. So if you're in a highly emotive state or emotional state, your rate may speed up. Obviously your rate may speed down if you're crying or so angry you cannot speak properly, so your words are actually being interrupted and you're slowing down. Volume or intensity, in particular in giving a speech where you emphasize certain words, so that's what they call accenting. So volume, of course, is how loud or how soft in your speech you want to be. Accenting is changing that volume or intensity on specific words to call attention to those words. So the words that are most important in your message, you might unconsciously stress, make louder because of the importance, and it signals that these are the words that are really important. Pay attention to what this person is saying with these words here, right? There's a whole range. You have articulation, and we will go into this more in depth next week when we talk about vocal delivery. So just for now, for you to understand that vocalics covers an entire range of what we call paralanguage or paralinguistic communication. It's using your voice, so it's linguistic, but it's not the words, it's all the other things that go along in your verbal communication. Proxemics is distance or the use of space in communication, right? We can skip through some of this.
Do you feel uncomfortable when someone stands too close to you? Do very bright colors in a room make you feel distracted? These questions are important to the study of proxemics. Basically, proxemics is the study of space and how we use it, how it makes us feel more or less comfortable, and how we arrange objects and ourselves in relation to space. The term was coined by the anthropologist Edward Hall. Hall was interested in understanding how humans use space in communication. In order to understand more about proxemics, we need to discuss different kinds of spaces. There are 4 kinds of distance that people generally use in communication. This can vary by place, and different cultures have different standards. These are known as realms of personal territory. Let's talk about these now. Public space is the space that characterizes how close we sit or stand to someone, like a public figure or public speaker. So if you are at an event listening to a professor give a lecture, you are probably about 12 to 25 feet away. Social space means we're getting a little closer, about 4 to 12 feet away. This is the kind of space you're probably in if you're talking to a colleague or a customer at work. Personal space is even closer. In this case, you're probably about 1 foot to 4 feet away from someone. This is reserved for talking to friends or family. Intimate space is for people who you are very close to. In this case, you're probably less than 1 foot away, and you might even be touching the other person. This is the space you're in with a romantic partner, for example.
Right. So the idea here is the space you set up indicates your level of familiarity with the person. Also with the other question of colors and bright spaces. So if you're giving a public presentation, or even for this class, if you're giving presentation, your space helps you communicate your message, right? So if your space is very distracting, then your message will not be heard because people might be busy staring at things behind you than listening to you, right? And this also goes for your appearance, which is not really distance, but in terms of setting up your space. So what you wear, where you stand, how busy is the room, and so on and so on and so on. And these are affect how you are able to communicate messages. Right. The last thing we want to go through right now in terms of nonverbal, it's the last, chronemics or chronemics, which is really the study of time and how time and timing affects communication. Right, so I hope it's not too small for people to read. And you can go into greater detail again. It's here on Canvas for you to read, right? But the idea that how we use time is specific to culture. And in terms of communication, one of the examples I can give, for example, when we say last Tuesday, there's no right or wrong answer. If I said last Tuesday, what do you think that means?
Last week Tuesday.
Last week Tuesday, right? Anybody else have a different meaning for last Tuesday?
It means that it was a fact that it's just last week Tuesday.
Okay, so in Trinidad, if we say last Tuesday, we mean the Tuesday that just went before, right?
Yeah.
It gets a little more confusing if this was Wednesday and I said last Tuesday. Am I referring to the Tuesday that just went before or the Tuesday that was last week? Right? And so different cultures would have different interpretations of what you mean by that, right? My favorite one is the other day, which means 1,000,001 things in Trinidad. The other day could be yesterday, it could be 5 years ago, it could be before your mother was born, the other day, right? The other day I saw Jim walk down the street. Like, it's not very specific, right? But it's our relation to time and how we use time to communicate things, right? So I will leave you again to read through this. And as you can see, there are different understandings of time, right? So it's an interesting read on how we use time in our communication. We are not really time bound in that way. We have a looser arrangement with time, right? If you tell a German be there for 8 o'clock, they'll be there 8 o'clock on the dot, right? This is if you ever heard of CP time. You ever heard of CP time? Colored people time? No? Sheltered, right? For some reason, how to put it, non-white people are notorious for a different understanding of time. And that's partly because the cultures we draw from were not clock bound. Time was set by different activities in the day. And so we were a little looser with our understanding of time. So my joke is, if you tell, I think Trinidadians have improved. If you tell a Trinidadian, be there for 8, we'll show up between 8:15 and 8:30 and consider ourselves on time. If you tell a Jamaican to turn up at 8, they will show up at 9 o'clock and consider themselves on time. If you tell a Nigerian to show up at 8, they will show up 2 days later and ask what's the problem. So we have different concepts of time. And the more we spend in an industrialized culture, the more important being on time, being close to that clock time becomes important in our communication and our understanding. So the typical rule is, if you're having a function and you really want people to show up at 8, you tell them it starts at 7. And then they start showing up around 8 o'clock and on time. That's our understanding of time. That's how we communicate time. So chronomics is the study of time and how we communicate time and what we understand time to mean in our communications. So auto sequence is not funny, right? You skip through that because we have examples of organizational communication. And again, you can read through that. So stuff like writing newsletters, constitutions, grant proposals, and so on and so on, right? Now, this is up on, oh, I actually see some comments here. That's nice. What, so I see some comments. I will wait to see some more comments so we can, but the idea here is how your appearance affects your ability to communicate, right? And in Trinidad, for example, we have this thing called the cult of respectability, right? And so how you dress, you associate how you dress with what level you are, right? So if your parents ever complain to you, pull up your pants, or you're going to church, so you need to wear a shirt and tie or a proper dress. You can't wear short pants in the bank. For some reason, shoulders is considered evil, so you can't have bare shoulders in government buildings. All these relate to our perception of the person based on how they address their appearance, right? And again, so if you're giving a speech, if you're giving a presentation, how you dress becomes very significant because it conveys a level of trustworthiness or approachability or whatever you're trying to communicate in that message, right? So, for example, out of sequence. You will not see a politician on a public stage giving a political speech, for example. It might be a specific event, like if they go to a sporting event, you might see them in jeans and a jersey. But if they're giving a campaign speech, they're going to be in a suit and tie, right? You're not going to see them in anything else. If it's any aberration, the jersey they're wearing is their party jersey. So the dress then informs the rest of the message. If they read the budget yesterday in short pants and a t-shirt, no one would pay attention, right? They would think, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not dressed appropriately. So that is a form of nonverbal communication. Again, up on Canvas, we have discussions. I also have for you to train your ear in listening to vocal delivery and how that affects communication, right? So I will leave these up for you to do on your own. It's just a series of videos to watch and read, and to discuss, have a discussion about. And the next thing is active listening, right? So listening is not just hearing, well, you know there's a difference between hearing and listening, right? Yes? Right. Right? So when we talked about the model of communication, listening is the role of the receiver. You are taking that, wow, that, okay, I'm going to use a very nerdy reference, so excuse me. But if you've ever seen Star Trek, they have a thing called a transporter, where you step into the transporter and you disappear in one spot and reappear in the next. So communication, I send out a message into the air, and the listener has to reassemble that message to make sense of it, right? Now, as I'm communicating, especially in a face-to-face, I'm sending out verbal and non-verbal communication. And as a listener, an active listener, you're looking for both verbal and non-verbal cues to be able to interpret what the message is, right? So we call it active listening because you are paying attention, you are interpreting and analyzing the message as you receive it. So there are different types of listening that we do, including appreciative, emphatic, comprehensive, or active listening, and critical or analytical listening. Right? So as if you're thinking of the communication model, appreciative listening, the message being sent is meant for the receiver to enjoy. So, you know, music, comedy, listening to an entertaining speech, like a Toastmaster speech, or a roast, wedding speech, so on and so on. Things that are meant to give you pleasure in a listening. And so appreciative then is that you are engaged in these activities and you're listening for pleasure, you're enjoying it, right? So in terms of music, you'll be listening to the lyrics, you'd also be listening to how the music plays and how it meshes together, and that's supposed to induce a pleasurable feeling. Right? So there's a difference between, for the speaker or how you're interpreting it as a listener, there's a difference between someone just giving you facts and someone giving you facts in an entertaining way, right? So there would be a difference, for example, between how a storyteller will tell you the history of an event, and a historian might tell you the history of an event. The historian will tell you on this date, XYZ happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. Whereas a storyteller would weave that narrative, and it will be interesting to listen to, so it engages you, right? So as a listener, an appreciative listening, you're actually listening to how and why it's a pleasurable experience. So you're enjoying it, but you're also noting as an active listener how and why it's pleasurable. The words they use, the kind of questions they ask, how they form the narrative, even how they use what we call rhetoric. So in your next class following this, Lang1008, we deal with argumentative or persuasive writing, and we talk more about rhetoric and making these kind of appeals when we write or speak. A lot of the times, especially when we're talking to our friends as a listener, so when your friend comes to tell you a sob story, and they're not looking for advice, they're not looking for solutions, They're looking for you to empathize. So emphatic listening then is showing as you're listening that sympathy, that caring. And there are paralinguistic or non-verbal cues that would go along with emphatic listening. In the picture, you see, for example, haptics. So she is touching the child to show comfort as she's listening to the child's problem, right? So here you are engaging in understanding the feelings and motives. So this is the part of the message that you are reinterpreting and reassembling as the receiver of the message, right? How is the person feeling? And again, this is both verbal and non-verbal, right? It is not your place to fix, judge, or in any way analyze what you're hearing. As an emphatic listener, all you're trying to do is understand the emotion and comfort or sympathize with the emotion being expressed, right? Very often when we have that kind of communication, we feel we need to offer solutions, and both parties go away frustrated because the person was not looking for solutions in the communication, and you become frustrated as a listener because they're not taking your solutions in any way, shape, or form, right? Comprehensive active listening. Here's where you want to extract as much information as possible from the message. So the sender is sending all forms of information. As a comprehensive or active listener, you are trying to reassemble the totality of the message. So you're looking for the inherent meaning. And usually in comprehensive or active listening, the person is giving you instructions or explaining something complex. So you're trying to reassemble that message, right? So where an emphatic listening, we're really trying to pay attention to the emotions being expressed. Here we want the totality of the message, right? So I want to know what your words mean. I want to know the nonverbal cues, what they mean. I want to fit them together to form a message, right? Now, again, when we talked about spotting liars, this is very important because this is one of the ways you spot a liar. Their words would be saying something and their gestures would be saying something completely different. And as a comprehensive listener and an active listener, you can see the difference between expression and words, right? So very often when people apologize and it's not really an apology and the body says it's not an apology, even if the words say I'm sorry. Right? So as an active listener, you're paying attention to everything. What you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you feel in terms of if they use haptics and they're touching you, right? Or even if they're not touching you directly, they might be touching something. They might be, you know, playing with their shirt sleeve. So here you see haptics and kinesics merging. They might be tapping the desk. When nervous speakers are standing at a lectern, they grip it for their life. That is also a form of communication. I know you're a nervous speaker because of how you're holding the lectern or how you're leaning and using it for almost physical support. When you're engaged in conversation, active listening, you paraphrase. So what I'm hearing you say is X, Y, and Z. Is that what you said? Okay, well, explain it to me again. Let me see if I understand it properly, right? So we try to paraphrase, we try to get that feedback to make sure we understand what they're saying. So when you ask questions in class, for example, is very important, because that is that and when we showed you the module of communication, that's that loop, that's that feedback. So that if you didn't get it, I need to re-explain, and until our transmission of message from sender to receiver is complete. Right? You have presentations at the end, so these skills will come up as you're doing your presentations, because there will be question and answers after each presentation. And this will allow you, then you would have to listen to the question, interpret what the question actually means, and respond to that. This is something in casual conversation we fail to do quite a bit. And instead of assessing what the person is really asking, we may take offense because we interpret their physical tone either as a challenge or disrespect. Right? So I don't know how many of you have been in a conversation, for example, right? And the person asks you something about what you said and you get upset. I've been on the receiving end of that because I like to play around with language a lot. So when someone says something, I would repeat it in the synonym, not word for word, but I would repeat it in my own words. And if the person's vocabulary is somewhat limited, they get offended because they think I'm saying something completely different. I had a conversation, for example, with a young man who said that soca needed to modify itself to meet an international market. And my response was, why should soca change? Soca is indicative of Trinidad. It shouldn't change to meet anybody. Dancehall didn't change. And he said, I didn't say change, I said modify. I was like, but modify means change. It's a synonym for change. And so we had a linguistic barrier because we had a different level of understanding of vocabulary, right? So I had to explain to him, if you're selling two glasses, he never got it, by the way. My analogy was, if you have two glasses, right, the same basic shape, size, same glass, but one has sparkles and one doesn't have sparkles, right? Are you going to sell them for the same price, or are they going to be a different price, right? Now, if you go into a store, the glass with sparkles would cost more. It's the same glass, but it has been modified, meaning it's been changed in some way. And yeah, I don't think he gets it to this day that modify and change mean the same thing, right? Critical or analytical listening, you're not just trying to get the message and understand the message in totality. You're actually going to evaluate the message, right? So a lot of times in persuasive speaking, and a political candidate or someone who's promoting a specific cause or product, analytical listening, you're trying to evaluate whether you trust this message, whether you're going to accept it, whether it makes sense. So not just what the message is, but how do you then evaluate that message? What does that message really mean? Is it something I can trust? Is it something I can agree with, or do I disagree with it? And so on and so on, right? So part of it, is it logical? Is it reasonable? And there are some experiments we can do when you're watching TV and you see an ad. Try analytical listening, critical listening. What really are they trying to push on me, and do I agree with it or do I disagree with it, right? When you're reading Facebook posts or Twitter, or the new thing is TikTok, and TikTok would be more visual. But do you agree with what they are saying, or do you disagree? What really is the message? What underlies the message? Is it based on logic, fact, reasoning, any of that? Or is it purely emotional and maybe not the most convincing thing you've heard, right? And again, we do that, or we're supposed to do that in when we have silly season and people are giving speeches. We evaluate what we've heard and whether we can trust it or not, based on various things, right? So this is a handy chart. The majority of the time you are listening, and then equal parts reading, speaking, and writing. So not just in class, but out of class, the majority of your communication might be listening. We're not always in an active conversation with somebody else. We are listening to get information, to make assessments, and so on and so on. Right? And if you want to do further reading, here's some further reading you can do. So the idea with active listening, or the 4 main types of listening. Again, we are in this class mostly interested in the critical listening and the comprehensive listening. If you're in a school setting, comprehensive and critical listening are very, very important, right? Emphatic listening, if you're in a personal communication setting, someone is communicating their emotions to you, and your main response is to deal with that emotion. And an appreciative listening, the pleasure of listening to something, and how and why it's pleasing. So to reiterate, right, and you see some overlap here. How do we do critical and comprehensive or active listening, right? And they're different phases. There's recognizing the literal meaning. So we're looking at the words. What do the words actually mean? Understanding the vocabulary. So not just the dictionary meaning, but also what we call the lexicon, how that word is used in everyday speech, what everyone assumes it to mean, right? So the literal meaning is the dictionary meaning, right? So a word like lazy. In the dictionary, lazy means, not lazy, idle. Idle is the word. In a dictionary, idle means not doing anything, right? In Trinidad vernacular, idle means I do things with no real purpose behind it, right? So when you're being idle in Trinidad, it's not that you're literally doing nothing. You're doing something that we do not attach a specific purpose or value to, right? So you might see, for example, just digging a hole in a beach. There's no real reason to dig a hole on a beach, but you're just doing it to do it. That's kind of Trinidad idle. So there's a difference between if you look up the meaning of idle in the dictionary and what it means, and if you look up the meaning of idle in Trinidad speech and what it means. When you say you're an idle person, it's not that you don't do anything. You don't do anything that would benefit anybody, including yourself, right? I, for one, I enjoy being a very idle person. I just do things for doing things. Enjoy life, right? Making inferences. So an inference is where you take your prior knowledge and interpret what is being said or what is being communicated. So you start attaching it, right? So to make an inference, you're filling in the gaps, in other words, in what people see, right? So, you know, like giving an excuse, for example, I couldn't attend class today because there was a death in the family and I need, I need some time off, right? The person didn't say there was a death in the family and I need time to grieve. I'm very emotional. I might be planning a funeral. And I don't think I'm in an emotional space where I could concentrate on anything in class. All of this we infer by saying by listening to there was a death in the family and please excuse me from class. So we start to attach all the understanding we have, where we might have experienced either firsthand or through reading, movies, anecdotes, etc., what it means to have a death in the family. So we start to add meaning, we fill in the gaps. This person had a death in the family, so obviously the person is going to be emotional, they're going to be sad, they might be preoccupied by thinking of the life of the person they just lost, their own mortality. They would not be able to concentrate, so they're asking to be let out of class. All that is embedded in the simple phrase, I had a death in the family, please excuse me from class, right? So that is us making inferences. Identifying the main idea. So the point of communication is to pass on a message, and that message is usually organized around some kind of central idea. And it's up to us as listeners to identify what that main idea is. So especially if we're doing comprehensive and critical listening, being able to understand what is the core message, what is the main idea, what is everything built around, right? So identifying the main idea, or what people call the thesis statement of that message. Summarizing the content. So I know what the main idea is, and I know how that main idea is developed, and I could sum it up in 2 or 3 sentences, what the message is about, right? Looking at the point of view, so knowing when we talk about culture, communication barriers, we're talking about also where the point of view the person might be coming from, and I think we mentioned that already. So there's a specific point of view attached to your gender, your age, your race, your class, your level of education, your job or profession, and so on and so, your religion, right, and so on. So listening to, when we think back to the speech we listened to in terms of explanation, so James Earl Jones, right, he's coming from a specific point of view. Now, when you can go and listen to it again, but it is, he's rereading a speech from Frederick Douglass, who was an abolitionist. And so it's a very specific point of view that's expressed in that speech, right? And the cues that we would follow would be literal and lexical meaning of the words. So recognizing the literal meaning, understanding how the vocabulary plays in speech, into the culture he's coming from and speaking to. And that will help us understand where this person is coming from, what assumptions are being made about the audience and what the audience should know, how the audience should sympathize, and so on and so on, right? So different points of view would affect the overall message being received, sent and received. Analyzing the reasoning, again, comprehend critical thinking. Is this logical? Is this sound reasoning? Does A follow B? Does he leap to conclusions without any kind of evidence or support, right? And then finding the evidence, as we speak of evidence or support, being able to separate what is the main idea from the examples and evidence used to support that main idea, right? So someone, for example, might be talking to you about voters' rights, but they go into a long story about when their grandmother couldn't vote. So the point of the speech isn't that their grandmother couldn't vote. The point of the speech is what is voting rights. So the anecdote about the grandmother is evidence to support their explanation of voting rights, right? So these are the 8 basic steps, especially for critical and comprehensive or active listening, right? Right, so we have further examples or explanations of the different types of listening. So what I want to do now, quickly jot down, if you haven't looked at this yet, quickly jot down the instructions. Everyone got it? As soon as you've written down the instructions, I'm going to split you into groups of 2. And you can exchange. So one student tell your story, second student write down what you understand. So using the 8 active listening or comprehensive listening strategies. So what is the literal meaning? The vocabulary used. So literal meaning, lexical meaning, vocabulary used. Is it hindrance, or does it help you understand? What do you infer? What do you think the main idea was? What is the summary of the story? What is the main point of view? Including values or beliefs that would have influenced the story. and what evidence is provided. The story is up to you, anything you're willing to relate. And then we will switch. So student 2 will then tell student 1 a story, and student 1 will then try and do the same thing, the same analysis, right? So as soon as you're finished writing on the instruction, show of hands. If you're finished. Yes? Right. I'll give you 1 more minute, and then I will split you up into groups of 2 for this exercise. And try not to be too long. Let's say 10 minutes. That'll be adequate for 2 people to share stories and you to jot down notes. So you will start at 10:42, right? So make sure you have the instructions, what you're supposed to get, and we will go from there. Well, apparently I can only do up to 11 rooms. This class is actually bigger than... Yeah. Right. Okay. Right. Here we are. Okay.
Miss, you're muted. I didn't hear what you just said.
I don't even know what happened. Welcome back. Not even sure when I mute. I don't remember pressing the mute button at all.
When we joined back the call, it said host muted everyone.
Yeah. Okay. So, yes. Gremlins and technology and whatnot. So, how was that experience?
First time I was ever in a break room.
I was confused on what was going on.
I was confused. I was like, okay.
Me too.
We had to rush with 3 persons, but it was good.
All right. So yeah, it really didn't. It was having a hard time splitting up into just 2 people. So I had some 3s and some 2s. So for breakout room 1, who shared stories? Who was in breakout room 1? All right. So
Was it us? Because I'm not sure about anything about break room first time, so I'm not sure if we were number 1.
No, we were 13.
13. Okay, numbered.
What number was I? What? Susanna and Brittany, what number were we?
We were 7.
okay, so if you're not sure what your group number was, room number was, that's fine. So what I will do then, let me get one room, any room to start, the 3 of you, and the rest of you will turn off your cameras and mute. So who wants to go first? So if you're in the same room together and you all volunteer, come to the front of the class.
Hi. We have breakout room number 9.
Okay.
I don't mind starting first.
Okay.
So the first story, oh wait, it was Bradley, myself, and Jillian.
Okay.
So the first story was told by me, and it was about a time that I went Maracas, and a huge wave came and knocked me down, and 2 women fell on me. So I was under the water for about 45 seconds, trying to stay alive.
Okay. And Bradley or Jillian, you all wrote down the main aspects of the story?
Yes, miss.
So Bradley, what did you get from her story? What was the main idea?
Miss, well, the main idea was that she was fighting for her life when 2 women was on top of she because of a wave that knocked them down in Maracas.
And what about the vocabulary?
Miss,
What were
well,
the literal meaning of the words?
Miss, well, I understand it. So.
Okay. So the vocabulary was clear.
Yeah.
What did you infer from her story? Or to put another way, what in your experience, either from having lived through it, read it, or seen it, did you add to her story to help flesh out the meaning?
Miss, I was like, Miss, that she's still alive and that a stranger came to help her.
And have you experienced those things yourself?
Not really, but.
So remember, when we're inferring from somebody's story, we're adding what we've experienced to that story so that we get the full understanding and the meaning, right? So if someone told you, I nearly drowned today, right? You think back to an experience either of you drowning or hearing about someone else drowning or any experience where you might have even suffocated so that you can relate to what that experience was like, right?
But I didn't really understand that one, so that is why
Okay,
like that piece.
okay. And of course, because was a narrative she was telling, so the examples would have been the description of the two people falling on top of you, right?
Yeah.
That would have supported the main idea. Thank you. Jillian? Somewhere on the screen? Is Jillian saying? Yes. Jillian, so what did you take away from the story? You were in the same group, right? Jillian? Jillian was in your group, right?
Yes, miss.
Okay. Don't forget to unmute.
Yes, sorry. Sorry. Yes, so I took away that she struggled. She was under the water for 45 seconds with two persons on top of her. And, she was glad to be alive at the end. That is basically what I got from what she had said.
Okay. And in terms of adding your own experience to so you understand the story better.
Well, I don't have any experience of what happened to her, but I understood what it is she had said.
Okay. All right. So inference, when I say experience, I think I should expand and say any understanding or prior knowledge of the topic at hand. So even if you've never been tumbled by a wave, at the very least, so you know what that feeling is like, you might have a basic understanding of what it means to not be able to breathe, right?
Yeah.
And that would inform how you understand the message, how you read the emotion in the message, how you fill in the blanks that might be there from what people might not actually say with their words or even express through nonverbal communication, right? Who else told a story?
I did.
Okay. And so I'll ask Destiny and Bradley to summarize, to tell me what they got from the story. What was the main idea? Summarize the story. How did you add meaning to it from your own experiences or understanding, and so on and so on. So, Destiny.
So the story that she told was that she was running from a vicious pit bull with flip-flops on. And while running, she fell, but the dog got a hold of her clothes. But luckily, she got away, and then she ran into the middle of the highway and almost got hit by a Junior Sammy truck. But she managed to roll under the truck and survive with minor bruises.
Okay. Good idea. It's good that you can laugh. If this was a real experience, it's good that you can laugh at it now. That was a harrowing experience, right? So what would be the main idea of her story?
The main idea that she almost died.
Right.
Because the truck almost hit her.
So it's interesting in terms of when we talk about communication and synchronicity or synchrony, the two of you tell a similar story about near-death experiences and surviving, right? So you both actually tell stories with a similar main idea. And you summarize the story. So, she was chased by a pit bull and she almost got hit by a truck, but she survived. What experience or understanding did you draw from to help understand the message?
Well, I almost got hit by a car, not a truck. So it was like my heart jumped out of my body. So it was a very terrifying experience. So I understand where she's coming from.
Right. So yeah, so we see we can take our own experiences to help us understand messages we're receiving. Right? So very good. Thank you. Bradley, what about you?
As well, the main idea was, as Destiny said, that she almost died by a truck hitting she. And also she could, like, if she did not escape the dog, she could have died there too, because it was vicious, and pit bulls, everybody know about pit bulls. And the reason why I understand the story in this scenario was because I own dogs. Like, I have a lot of dogs, and I, at times, like when strangers come and stuff, they could be vicious. So that is why I understand the story.
Okay. Good. So we're starting to see as listeners how we extract meaning from a story, right? And when you get more adept, anything anyone tells you anytime, you can extract meaning and understand their purpose, and it makes you a better communicator. All right. So thank you for sharing. Let me do 2 more groups. So some volunteers to share what y'all did in the breakout room. Don't be shy. Say there's no wrong answers. It's all a learning experience. At least 2 more groups. Anybody? Come on.
Miss, well, Dominic and I was in room 10. Dominic.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dominic told me a story that he was sleeping on a Saturday morning, and about 6:30, he was awoken by a dog howling and crying. So when he went to investigate, his father was beating his dog because the dog was young and teething and was eaten away on the vehicle mud guard. Tire guard or mud guard. I think that's what he said. Yeah. And he was scared for the puppy or dog, and he was afraid, and he wanted to like go to the dog or the puppy, and his father told him, no, leave the dog right there and don't go by it, because his father was like really angry. And yeah, that is what he told me. So what I take from his story is that he was awoken by the sound of the dog, and he was afraid. His vocabulary was clear to the point that I understood. I don't have a dog per se that I would understand what he means by the dog was howling and crying, and I don't really understand what a dog is be doing by teething, because I don't have a dog to understand that. So the main idea, I guess, was that he was scared at the sound, and he was sad that his father had to punish the dog in that sense. And yeah.
Okay. Even though you don't have a dog teething, know what teething is for a dog, but we've heard of teething in babies, right?
Yes. So I have a baby, so I understand that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They will chew on anything, including you. So,
True.
Right. So again, drawing on your own experiences, your own understanding to help flesh out, right? And if we think of teething, then we think it's a very young dog, a young puppy. So it also gets an emotional response. So we can empathize with Dominic for feeling sad that the dog was being punished because it's a young little dog. It doesn't know better, right? Kind of thing. Thank you, Dominic. What about you?
Right. So Chandra told me how she was working in the Yara ammonium plant, and one day it had a leak, and they had to go inside to protect from the gas. And what happened was she was not in a correct station at the time, so she ended up going to the wrong building, which she wasn't supposed to be in, right? And that she was embarrassed because everybody's looking at her like, why are you here? You're in the wrong space, things like that. So that was the story, really. So what I get was, right, so what she was saying was it had a leak and she had to go inside, but she ended up in the wrong place. The vocabulary was clear as she was saying she was embarrassed because I understand that when you're not in your correct place, you seem to feel awkward. The next thing too was it was hustling as everybody had to rush to their stations. And also, you know, you had to get to safety. The main idea was it had a leak and you had to get to safety, which was indoors. The point of view was she wasn't where she was supposed to be. That's basically what it was. You believe so you have to go to the correct place in order to feel the sense of proper safety, I guess. The evidence was everybody was looking at her and she was just embarrassed. That's really what I got from it.
Okay, good. Thank you. You picked up a lot of the emotions and the main idea. Chandra, for you, was the main idea that there was a leak and getting to safety, or was the main idea feeling out of place and embarrassed?
Well, it was basically being embarrassed because it was different buildings and you're supposed to be in your departmental building, and I wasn't at the time. And in an instance like that, when you have a leak and everybody is scampering, the security would know, okay, well, Chandra is supposed to be in the compound, so where is she? So everybody in the entire company will know that it was not where you're supposed to be. So it was embarrassing.
Right. So, Dominic, in this instance, I think the emotion, so being an empathetic listener, is also what she wanted from you, right? So when we're doing these kind of exercises, active listening, also knowing what the speaker expects of us as a listener becomes important. And you would notice a lot of times when we're sharing personal recounts, personal anecdotes, we want that emotional, that emphatic listener, someone who can identify with our emotions. And I want to applaud you all. You've been doing a very good job of that so far and being able to understand what the story is about and what you're supposed to get out of the story. So good job all. And then let me take one more group. And then hopefully we would leave with half an hour to spare. Didn't really hit my mark of 1.5 hours, but we get in there. So one more group.
Miss, I want to go next.
Okay.
Okay, so my members were Saskia and Brittany.
Okay.
So I told a story about there was this time me and my little brother, we were playing football inside the house, and I accidentally threw the ball and it knocked down my mom's expensive vase. And she was quick to blame my brother for it because that's something you would think a little child will do. And I didn't say anything. I just let him get blamed for that. And he was punished. Like, she took away his tablet and everything that he liked because it was really valuable to her. And throughout the day, I was feeling guilty about it. So I just had to confess because I couldn't let him be like that when he was the innocent one. So I went and confessed and said that's how I knocked down your vase. And well, after that I had to be punished. But she was like really shocked because like she didn't think it was something I would have done.
Saskia or Brittany, what did you, I'll start with Saskia, what did you get from the story?
Basically that she has, well, she has a little brother that she usually, or the family usually associate with troublemaking also. And so in the event that she knocked down her mom's vase, she instantly put the blame on him because he is easily targeted when it comes to giving trouble, probably running around the house carelessly, basically.
Okay, so what do you think the main idea of her story?
I don't know. I took from that I took that she was blaming her brother. So she was blaming her brother for what she did, so that probably she wouldn't get punished, and evidently, well, eventually she started feeling guilt, so she came forward and confessed and got in trouble.
Okay. And what experiences or understandings do you have that helped you to flesh out her message, to understand the message, fill in the gaps?
What message I got from it? As I said?
What experience or understanding in your own life helped you understand what she was trying to say?
Oh, in my own life.
Did you make?
Okay. In my own life, as I could relate, I would say that I don't know.
You have siblings?
I do have siblings, but I am the youngest. So I probably cannot relate to something like that as me being the youngest, where it is I wouldn't put the blame on my elder brothers because I would probably be the one they would put the blame on, probably when I was younger, so for doing something irresponsible. Or maybe I could learn that from it.
Well, yeah, so we know sibling dynamics. If we've had siblings or close cousins, friends, we know this dynamic where there's a bit of competition, but there's also love, and that tempers the competition. And sometimes we might laugh if they get punished, but it's not fun if they're punished for something that they didn't do. We kind of feel empathy that way, right? So that's something, if you have siblings in your family, close cousins, close friends, and you've been in that kind of situation, that's the kind of emotional experience we would draw from to understand why Shazana would feel guilty. Right?
Oh, so she basically felt empathy towards her little brother, so she then took up the blame. So, she would cover some of whatever it is he was getting from his parents.
Yeah. Thank you. Brittany, what about you? What did you get from the story?
I got that she didn't want to see her brother accused wrongfully and punished wrongfully, so she confessed what she did.
Okay, right. So we're kind of seeing how guilt informs decisions, right? How we feel guilty about something, and that would hopefully 90% of the time lead us to own up or confess and accept, what rightfully should be ours, the blame, the punishment, etc., etc., right? Who else told a story in the group?
I told a story in the group, probably a relatable story from me and everybody else. Sorry. I said that I have a best friend, fictional, and she was telling me, she was relating to me a situation that she was going through, with her current boyfriend, whereas they are in a long distance relationship. However, due to the COVID situation, it has been putting a strain on them both and maybe causing a rift. It probably then forced, well, not forced, but it lured her into probably getting friendly with somebody else who lives within close proximity to her, and she was easily attached. And she came to me, well, in confidence, and to have me know that she was feeling guilty. And I gave her a smirk, knowing her and knowing that she knows me. And I probably giggled a bit. And she interpreted my smirk and my giggle as probably judging her or disrespectful to her. And I was also she was offended by my smirk and my giggle, and I was also offended that she was offended by my smirk and my giggle, because to me, this is my best friend. You have known me for the longest while. So you wouldn't take my smirking or giggling or whatever, well, you're not supposed to, as being offensive. More so as we just relating to each other, and this is how we communicate to each other.
Okay. Susanna, what did you get from her story?
Okay, from her story, I would say it was a misunderstanding with friendship, because if they were friends for a long while and they're supposed to know each other, obviously she would have known it was a joke. But like, I can relate to that, because I think I would do something like that, because I don't know, like, friends don't take those things seriously, some of them. So I would say it was a misunderstanding with their friendship, and it probably led to a broken friendship.
Okay. Brittany?
Yes, I would say the same thing.
Say the same thing?
Yeah.
Which leads to, interestingly enough, one of the last things I wanted to share with you all. Just went looking for some examples of miscommunication, but lo and behold, we have one example in the group already. And how, as you realize, Saskia, body language could undermine our intent completely when we're transferring a message, right? And what your friend was probably looking for was an emphatic listener, someone to sympathize and go, oh no, I see your problem, what you're going to do, and have them so they're allowed to vent and release emotions. But what she got instead was, I know who you are, and a giggle and a smirk. So you were actually more of a critical and comprehensive listener in that instance. And she reacted because she wanted an emphatic listener, right? And so, interestingly enough, the idea of communication is not just what I say, and we talked about this, not just what I say, it's not just what you hear, it's what each party does with the information between sending it and receiving it that makes up how we communicate. So if you are deliberately or putting a position where you're giving a presentation, you have to do a speech, or you're writing something in an official capacity, being very conscious of how your message will be received is as important as being aware of the message that you're crafting in the first place, right? It helps you craft that message, right? So as we always say, be conscious of your audience and how you expect your audience to react, and be monitored, especially if it's a face-to-face or a speech or a presentation. You could actually monitor your audience reaction by looking for that feedback and alter what you're saying so that your message isn't lost. All right, so I'm going to leave you. Let me offer the warning first. I haven't really watched it. I'll do the clip. I think I found it. This was circulating a while ago and I've seen this before. in terms of miscommunication. I'll just leave it, play it, and when it's finished, we will just wrap up class, okay?
Four candles. Four candles. There you are. Four candles. Well, there you are, four candles. No, four candles. Candles for forks. Got any plugs? Plugs? Yeah. What kind of plugs? A rubber one, bathroom. What size? 13 amp. Electric bathroom plugs, you call it. Trade. Electric bathroom. What? Saw tips. Saw tips. Which one? Ointment, something like that? Saw tips, but covering the saws. Tips. No, we haven't got any. Covered them, but we haven't got any. Got any O's? O's? O's. No O's. O's. I thought you meant O's. O's. Say O's. No O's. O's? What? Oh, you mean pantyhose? Pantyhose? No, O's. O's for the gate. Mon repose. O's. Letter O's. Letter O's. And you want two? Yeah, next. Got any peas? God's sake, why didn't you bleed tell me that? I'm up the stairs already for that. They tell me bleed there. I'm up and down the shop all the time. I've got all the shop up and down here today. do you want? No, tins of peas. You're having me on, aren't you? There we are. Right. Pumps. And pumps, food pumps. Come on. Food pumps. Food pumps. Food pumps. Tidy up, can you? There we are. No pumps for your feet, brown pump size 9. You are having me on. You are definitely having me on. Washers? What? Windscreen washers, car washers, dishwashers, floor washers, back scrubbers, lavatory cleaners, floor washers. Half-inch washers. Oh, tap washers, tap washers. Yeah. Look, I've had about enough of this. Give us that dish. Ignore myself down here. What's this? What's that? Oh, that does it. That does have it. I've had just about enough of this. Mr. Jones, you come out and service customer, please. I've just about had enough of this. Look what it's got on there. Look what it's got.
Right. How many would you like? 1 or 2?
So we could see in that example vocabulary, timing, pronunciation, a whole list of barriers for communication, right? So I'm going to leave you with that. Let us, I'm just going to ask any volunteers if you want to either round of questions and your takeaways. So I'm not going to go through the entire class because I see there are 36 of us, 35, and that will put us past 12 o'clock. So any volunteers, someone who didn't get a chance to speak today, what is your main takeaway? Or if you have any questions you need addressed right now, okay? So open floor. And if I get at least 5 responses, class finishes, class ends. So any 5.
Miss, the assignment with the non-verbal communication video tutorials, what do you mean by collaborate with one of your classmates to make a short tutorial video?
So pair up. I think I'm pretty sure using the Zoom function and Canvas, you can set up a meeting, or you can coordinate via WhatsApp, or this is a little difficult because of COVID, but the idea then is for you to act out a communication scene, right? Either using what you know with nonverbal communication, the communication process, and so on and so on. So the two of you will collaborate on a scene that will exemplify different aspects of nonverbal communication, kinesics, haptics, distance, or proxemics, chronemics, etc., and little skits to demonstrate what that looks like. Now, again, we have some restrictions because of COVID. I think you can set up Zoom meetings via Canvas. Google has an option now, Google Meet, and I believe you could record on Google Meet as well. Facebook has Facebook Rooms. So, and of course, call conferencing with WhatsApp. So you probably would not get to do haptics because, you know, social distancing, no touching. But in terms of kinesics, vocalics, even proxemics in the way of how you dress your space as for communication, these are things that you could use and you can explain in your videos, okay? Does that make it clearer?
Excuse me, how long the video is supposed to be?
No more than 2 minutes. I don't think you need a whole 2 minutes to explain body language and communication or...
Miss, I saw 5 minutes on the canvas.
Yeah, we ain't doing 5 minutes. We could say 2. That 5 minutes was back in the day when people could actually meet with each other and do longer things. Communicating via screen is a little different, right? So I would say aim for about 2 minutes. No more than 5 if you go over, but we're looking for about a 2-minute video, right? Any other questions?
Excuse, I have a question. Would the 2 people in the video be actually having a full conversation based on the nonverbal aspects?
Yes. Let me just throw that up so I make sure I know what I'm talking about. Right. Let's see. We're talking about the main assignment, right?
Yeah, the nonverbal tutorial.
Right. So this is what, if you haven't seen it yet on Canvas, this is what we're talking about. And yeah, so no more, 5 minutes is the absolute max. It does not have to be 5 minutes, right? So you imagine that you need to explain these very human forms of communication to an alien, someone who just landed from another planet, from another space, and might not understand what we mean by body language, how we undulate our voice, so intonation, inflection, blah, 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 blah. What we mean by how we set up our space, so proxemics, or how we relate to time, and how would you explain these things? So it doesn't have to be long explanations, it could be brief. However, you would teach that to someone who never heard of these things, never saw them, never experienced them. How would you explain that's part of our communication, right? So it can range from, well, obviously we would not be the 2 of you in the same space acting out scenarios, because that's not really going to happen. So it could range from you doing a mini lecture, you're collaborating on PowerPoint to explain these things. However you think you would be able to teach someone who has no idea what these things are, what they mean and how we use them, right? So I'm leaving the pairing up to you. Pick someone you want to work with and come up with a tutorial how I would teach somebody about these non-verbal communication skills, right? Okay, any other questions?
Excuse me.
Yes?
Sorry, I'm turn my camera on. About the word alien, just for clarification, right? Like how could Americans would call Canadians aliens because they're not really from their area. We could play like someone from New York, while trying to learn something, Trinidad culture or something.
Well, I actually imagine little green men. So they weren't from Earth at all. They had no connection to humans. And so their communication has nothing to do with how humans typically communicate, right? Because even if you are from, the interesting thing about non-verbal communication, it doesn't matter what language you speak, right? There will be some cultural differences, but by and large, everybody knows body language and what body language means. Everybody knows what inflecting the voice means, and so on and so on. And they can pick up cues, right, from that. So really someone who has never communicated in a human way before. So think of little green men from Mars. And how would you explain to little green men from Mars how we use non-verbal communication as humans? Right? Okay, so I'm going to wrap up class now. It's 11:51. 9 minutes extra is better than no extra time at all. So thank you so much. This video will be up by the end of the day. If you have any further questions, remember I'm available WhatsApp until 10 p.m. or if it's a burning question and you need to call until 4 p.m. So I'm here in case you need to chat, right? So I'm going to end the meeting now. Thank you all. Attendance has been taken by your screen, by my screen, right? So see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Miss. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Miss.
Bye. Enjoy lunch.